Hello everyone, welcome back to Joe Talks Politics. I am your host, Joseph Musia. It has finally happened. Impeached former Western Cape Judge President John Hlophe is destined to take up his seat on the Judicial Service Commission. This is a constitutional body charged with, among others, selecting judges. As a commissioner, Hlophe can technically sit in when his replacement is discussed. Is this appropriate? We discuss this issue with legal expert Professor Piere De Vos of the University of Cape Town. Let's get right into it. What is your opinion on the fact that Judge Hlophe is able or allowed to get into the JSC? Is it even an issue?
Yeah. Okay, so I have a slightly complicated view on this, in the sense that once you're elected to Parliament, then theoretically at least, the voters have decided you are on the list, although Mr. Hlophe wasn't, Dr. Hlophe wasn't, you're in Parliament, so now you're MP, you should have the rights. So I find it a little bit, I'm not sure it's the right way to deal with this, to say an individual person shouldn't be on this committee or on the JSC or whatever, because for whatever reason. Is it a good thing that Hlophe is going to be on the JSC? I think it's absurd and preposterous, because it's a person who was rightly impeached for gross violations of his code of judicial ethics, and now he's going to sit there. He's obviously going to taint in many ways the process, and as we know from the Judicial Conduct Tribunal ruling that found that he was guilty of gross misconduct, it berated him for making false allegation at the most senior black judges in South Africa to try and save his own skin, so to speak. So I don't think he should be. But the voters have voted for MK, they're entitled to a seat. So MK, I think as a party, so Mr. Jacob Zuma really, can put him there, I think. But I don't think it's a good thing. It's a bad thing for the JSC, but democratically, I'm not so convinced that he should be banned from the position.
But on the issue of him being a member of parliament and therefore that entitling him to that position, what is your view on the fact that somebody like Judge Hlophe or somebody like Ms. Mkhwebane, who is now with the EFF and was taken through a very serious parliamentary inquiry and found to be wanting. What is your view on the fact that the Constitution says nothing about whether a person found guilty of such serious violations are able to become members of parliament?
Yes, so once again there is the legal kind of principle and legal issue, and then there is the practicalities. I think in the South African Constitution, we made a very specific choice when we drafted the Constitution, which is obvious choice informed by our history, where most South Africans couldn't stand for public office, couldn't be in Parliament. So our rules, our constitutional rules, are quite open. It's very, firstly, there's a right to join political party, to stand for election and so on. And secondly, the limits on who is disqualified, they are very few. You have to be a citizen, you can't have been convicted of a crime and sentenced to more than 1 year imprisonment without the option of fine, you can't be unrehabilitated insolvent, but that's it. I think it's a choice, and I don't disagree with that choice, that we're rather going to make it open. The idea is, it is then for the voters to look at the party to say, oh, they have 20 crooks on their list, we're not voting for them. The fact that the voters don't do that, sometimes they see there are 20 groups and then they vote for that party, is to do with the dysfunction, as I see it at least, of our politics, of the way in which also our history influence the present and the kind of decisions people make. So I think it is unwise for parties to have tainted people like that on their list and as members of parliament. But once again, I'm not sure that it's something that should be legally prohibited. In theory, in the end, it all come out in the wash. The voters will decide, because that is what a democracy is. Of course, sometimes the voters decide in ways that I personally don't like, but that's also democracy.
But is it that the voters decide, because as you pointed out yourself, Judge Hlophe, for instance, was not on the candidates list when the voters decided they want that party. But then he came through what I would call the back door and became a member of. So he was not voted as somebody on the list.
Yeah. So the fact that he's in parliament, the MK in a way, I cheated. Not necessarily. It might be legally valid, but they just told everybody on the list to make themselves unavailable so that they can make a new list, which is against at least the spirit of what the law says. And you are correct that in cases like that, the voters have really no clue for who they voted. The people on the list are not, most of them didn't go to parliament. I would say to that, though, that at the next election, the voters will now, because you have 5 years and then there's a new judgment by the voters. In 5 years, the voters will have to decide, is this okay for the party to have put Dr. Hlophe there or not? Maybe most MK voters actually, I suspect, will going to say it is.
Yeah, but that is now when we come to this thing, it involves a bit of politics in terms of you people in the law speak about the spirit and the letter of the law. The letter of the law says there's nothing wrong, he can be, but would the constitutional drafters have had in mind the fact that somebody who is a chapter 9 head of a chapter 9 institution, who is found to be not fit for that position, but is then able to go and sit in the committee of parliament that actually decides on who becomes the head of that chapter 9 institution from which they were removed?
Yeah, so they probably didn't think that. And I find it also uncomfortable, bad for the system. And the problem is now, how is there a way to fix this? So for constitutional lawyers, if you look at people who look at different constitutions, there's a big debate going on at the moment to say what should especially courts do. Can they do anything to try and prevent the democratic process from being subverted in this and other ways? And so some people say, well, we must be careful. Courts are not elected, so they must be a little bit humble and they cannot fix the politics. On the other hand, there's a famous guy called Professor Issakarov who argues the courts must use the text, but there are different ways of it to interpret a text. We say in the law, you have a purpose of interpretation, so you ask, what is the purpose of this provision? And then you give it a meaning according to the purpose. And then they can interpret provisions in the Constitution in ways that are going to at least lean towards preventing parties and so on from subverting the spirit of the Constitution. I am sitting on the fence on this. I think in some context where the whole system is threatened, so if somebody gets voted into parliament and they try to dismantle the democracy, I think the courts have to step in and they have to try and preserve the kind of democratic system.
But there are parties in parliament that have very strong feelings about this particular issue, especially because of it triggered by the individuals that we spoke about. Would it be desirable for political parties to sit down and say, listen, we realize that constitutionally there is not much that can be done now, but we think that a process should start to amend the constitution so that it is very clear on this. It does. The constitution does not prevent, but it doesn't say you can either.
Okay, so I'm always, maybe it's the older I get, the more sanguine I get, the more I see that the history is 10,000 years, a few years now, who knows what will happen. I'm always a little bit worried to think, if we make the change for what is happening now, is it not going to have bad consequences in another time? You know, if we give the public protector the power to make binding findings, if there's a new public protector, is that not going to become a problem? So, that said, I think it's worth having a debate, as it is about other parts of the Constitution. To get 2/3 of the National Assembly to support an amendment is not going to be easy. But there might be another way, at least as far as the National Assembly is concerned. It has powers in the Constitution to make rules for itself. Those rules have to be more or less democratic, but the rules itself, for example, can say, for this and this committee, or for a nomination to the JSC, you cannot stand if you have been impeached or a court had found you to be not fit and proper, and then it's a clearly defined rule. And if they do it well, it will probably pass constitutional muster. So it might not be necessary to amend the Constitution for a problem like an impeached person sitting on the body that is deciding on the appointment of people to the body that they were impeached from.
Professor, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. That's it for this week. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to hit the like button. And if you are not yet a subscriber, please consider subscribing to help our channel grow. See you in the next one.